Welcome to the next episode of the CHRO Insights. I'm very happy to welcome Mr. Azfar here with us today. Thank you, Azfar, for being part of this panel consistently and welcome.
Rahul, thank you very much for inviting me. Always a pleasure. It's been my privilege to be on these panels with people business over the years and really enjoy them.
Fantastic. Getting on in this discussion, Azfar, I would like to start with the first question. The first question is, how would you best describe your leadership style? And the second part to that question is, what are some of the do's and don'ts around you? So what can we do and especially can't do in front of you? So your leadership style and the do's and don'ts around you.
So I actually, since you were kind enough to share the questions with me in advance, I actually asked some of my team members what my leadership style was so that I don't give a completely self-absorbed answer here. So the words that I heard from them were inclusive, consultative, transparent on the positive side. On the not so positive side, one of them said that I can be annoying at times and I may display some OCD behavior. I'd also like to think that I'm authentic as a leader. So I am who I am, and I don't take any pains to kind of try and be someone different.
What are things that we cannot do in front of you?
Be disrespectful to other people. Be inattentive. And especially if someone's kind of engrossed on their phone, I find it very annoying. I'm also not very pleased if people don't come prepared to meetings. And if anybody claims that they don't like reading, then I take a dim view of it. I greatly encourage people to read. So those are some of the things that you can't.
Fantastic. What are values which are core to you, very core to you, and how do you also, if you could think about how do you really display them, or some instance in which you've displayed that at your workplace?
So I think the two values that I hold on to very strongly are, one is integrity, the other is trust. I believe these are two things that I value very strongly. An example of, and a third I think is courage. I've never been in a war zone, so I've never had to display physical courage, but I think more in terms of moral courage. And that means being willing to take on negative consequences for taking a stand on what you think is right. And an example of that would be, for example, in one of the organizations I worked with, there was a very senior leader in my team who had been appointed at the behest of the CEO of that particular region, whose background verification came back as red. So he or she had, in their application submitted a PhD, but when we checked with the university, we found that the person was not a PhD. And so I called that person in. The person explained why they made that error, and I explained to the person that while I empathize with the reason why they've made the error, I think being in HR, we would have to ask that person to leave, because we were, as HR, asking a lot of people who were coming back as red on background verifications to leave, and we couldn't make an exception for someone in HR, even if that person was senior. And I got a lot of pressure from the regional head to let go of that, and I, did not succumb to that pressure. And that led to, I think, fraying of relationship with that regional head. So, but that was the consequences I was willing to take for standing up for what I thought was the right thing to do.
In the world of HR, Asfar, before we started the record button, you said, of course, we know you've more than 3 decades of experience now. Looking at the future, what are some of the emerging trends, and how do you think HR is really evolving, especially in the near future? How do you think HR will evolve in the next 3 to 5 years?
See, if you take a look at the role of HR in an organization, to my mind, HR has kind of three main roles. One is HR acts as the custodian of the organization's culture. The second is HR acts as a business enabler or an organizational enabler. So it helps institutionalize the organization. It helps enable the business by ensuring that talent is available at the right time with the right capability. And the third is it helps ensure that the employee experience is as positive as can be. Right. So these are the three broad areas. And it's been like that when I entered organizations. It's like that now. I don't see that changing in the future, in the foreseeable future either. I think what changes are the ways you go about accomplishing these three purposes. So, for example, the employee experience. Obviously, technology has changed since I started working. We are more tech-enabled now, and therefore the employee experience is more tech-enabled. Whether it's hiring, whether it's onboarding, whether it's learning and development, whether it's the way you go about reviewing performance, whether you reward and recognition, the exit process. The entire employee life cycle is more tech-enabled now. But the purpose why, or the purpose that the tech is focused towards hasn't changed, which is to make that experience of that employee as positive as possible. Similarly, in terms of enabling business, obviously, since the time I came into the workforce, which was 93, the economic liberalization had just taken place, but we were still largely a controlled economy. Obviously, that's changed. With that, competitiveness has changed. With competitiveness changing, obviously, how you acquire talent, how you develop talent, how you retain talent, engage talent, those challenges have changed, right? The workforce demographics have changed, and therefore the ability of HR to stay current with the need of your multi-generational workforce has changed. So that those two things are likely to get further accentuated going forward. Technology is only increasing in pace at which it's changing. Similarly, we're getting newer generations into the workplace, so HR needs to adapt, understand what the newer generations want out of work, and be able to make sure that the organizations are in a position to offer that. In terms of culture, I think that has remained more or less constant and is likely to remain constant going forward, helping organizations articulate what values they stand for, and therefore what culture they'd like to build within the organization, and to ensure that those get reflected in people practices, policies, and experiences. I think that part is likely to remain. So, but I think the three broad areas are probably technology, so that's going to impact. The second is the changing demographics. And the third, I think, especially in the case of India, is that economic prosperity levels are changing. When economic prosperity levels change, the opportunities available to the workforce only increase. And as opportunities available to the workforce increase, people have more choice, and therefore their willingness to stay with the same organization decreases unless they feel that all their requirements are being met, and there's always a challenge. Which is why you see, for example, my father worked in the same organization for 42 years. My longest tenure in an organization has been 7 years. And the next generation, I think, thinks that if you've worked in an organization for 3 years, they should be getting a long service award. So that, I think, is going to change, and therefore it's going to become more challenging for people for organizations to remain connected to their workforce in a more meaningful way, beyond just having a transactional connection.
31 years, Azfar, of work experience. If we could build a time machine, and allow you to go back 31 years when the younger Azfar was just entering his first workplace, with all the wisdom, experience that you hold now, if you get 2 minutes with the younger Azfar, what is it that you would say to him?
So, experience, yes. Wisdom, I'm not so sure. But what I tell the younger Azfar is that So I think the younger Azfar was very impulsive in decision making. So I asked the younger Azfar to be a little more deliberate in the way he made decisions. I'd advise the younger Azfar to be a little less self-assured. I think I thought I knew much more than I actually did. So I advise the younger Azfar to be a little less self-assured and be a little more willing to listen to people with more experience who were advising him at that time. And the third thing probably would be one thing that I've realized is that the manager that you work with has a huge impact on you. So I would advise the younger Azfar to factor in the manager while making career decisions and not just the organization. Because you might join a great organization, but if your manager is not great, the fact that you're in a great organization is not going to be a great experience for you.
Again, picking up from this string of a great manager, what according to you makes a great manager? And this is not a leader, this is a manager. You were about to say.
No, so I think to me, the bedrock of being a great manager, in a way, the necessary condition, is can you trust your manager? Right? Do you feel that your manager has your back and your best interest at heart? So I think that is absolutely the fundamental building block of being a great manager. If you don't engender trust in your team, you are not a great manager, right? So that would be number one. Secondly, I think the ability of the manager to help their team member navigate the system, whether it's and there are two kinds of systems here. One's the organizational system, one's the professional system. So I think if you have a manager who can act as a good mentor, I think that's in navigating both the organizational and the professional systems. I think that's the second one. And thirdly, I think is the ability of the manager to act as a meaning maker for the team members. I think a lot of times, especially if you have younger team members, they sometimes miss the kind of forest for the woods kind of a thing. So to be able to kind of help create meaning for them in the work that they're doing, I think is also a big requirement of a manager.
Hypothetical question as well. Let's say you're interviewing a candidate and you've got very limited time and you can only ask one question to determine the fate of the candidate. What will that question be?
So I'm tempted at this stage, Rahul, to say that my one question to that person would be, do you read P.G. Wodehouse? Because if you read P.G. Wodehouse, then I think I can trust you and take you on. So, no, but for all the non-Woodhouse readers, I don't actually do that. So not to be taken seriously. Though if you read Woodhouse, you will get some brownie points with me. I think the one question that I would ask them is to share with me when they think they've done well and when they think they've experienced failures and how they've responded to those failures. So just to get a sense of what they define as success and what they define as failures, right? So just to get a sense of that would be of great help. If I had one more questions, I'd check to see if they've experienced excellence in anything, in any aspect of their life, right? Because if you've experienced excellence in one, then it's easy for you to understand what it takes to be excellent in another sphere. So the amount of discipline, the amount of hard work, the amount of practice that it takes you to become excellent out of here. So
fantastic. As one of the L&D leaders, the next question is more around tech, AI, digital. We've been talking about it a lot. What are your views? How do you think that tech is changing, the L&D practices of the future and the present?
See, if you see from 93 onwards when I entered the workforce, so from 93 to 2024, there have probably been two inflection points. The first inflection point was in the early 2000s when self-paced learning came in, or e-learning, and then you had the LMS came in. And the other is more recently when Gen AI has come in, and I don't think the full impact of Gen AI is visible right now. I think it'll play out in the next few years, and I think that will be a kind of a big inflection point. I think the first inflection point, what it did was it supplemented instructor-led learning with something called self-paced learning. So now you had the ability to kind of blend both and create a more impactful learning solution. I think where Gen AI is going to really have an impact is when Gen AI manages to create an AI mentor or an AI coach. Because right now, as far as content is concerned, I think there's plenty of content. In fact, there's an overdose of content. People have more content than they know what to do with, or they can digest in any one lifetime. I think what's missing right now is the ability to make sense of the content, and that usually is something where is a role that mentor or a coach can help you with. And I think as Gen AI gets more sophisticated, you will have an AI mentor, AI coach. Thus, right now, it's either too time consuming for leaders to act as mentors, or very few leaders are certified coaches. Most of the coaching is done externally, which is an expensive proposition. It can't be done at scale because of the cost involved. But I think with AI coming in, both mentoring and coaching will be done at scale, and I think that will be of great benefit to people. The more transactional part of technology has been that now that you have micro learning, so you can break down the learning into smaller bits which you can consume in the flow of your work, so you don't have to keep time aside for learning. Do it while you're working itself. So that's more transactional. One of the negatives of impact of technology on learning has been that organizations are setting less time aside for structured learning, which basically means that people don't have enough time to, in a dedicated way, reflect and learn from reflection, which I think is, if you're familiar with how people learn, there's a lot of learning to be had from reflection. I think the time to reflect has really come down, which is impeding learning. The other is, as structured learning comes down, the ability to practice, get feedback has also come down. Though in some of the tech areas, you have simulations that give you practice and feedback, but especially on the behavioral leadership side, that's not the case. And I think that to some extent has impacted the quality of leadership that you experience in people managers. I think when I was starting off, the quality of people managers was far superior to the quality of people managers we have now.
The new generation, the generation that is coming into the workforce now, when you speak to this members of this generation, what's the most common piece of advice you find yourself constantly giving to this generation?
So I mean, very frankly, I think as I mentioned earlier, the one thing that I tell them to do is read. Most of them are not familiar with this concept. I think when you ask them, what are you reading, their most common answer is emails. You mentioned earlier in this conversation, the one thing that I advise all our new hires of this generation is to read. It's something that they're not very fond of. In fact, if you ask most of them, they'll probably tell you the things that they read are only emails. But jokes aside, I ask them to kind of consume content in any form that they can, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a video, right? Because in your own life, through your own experiences, you're never going to get as much breadth as you will if you consume third-party content, right? Content beyond your own life. So earlier, that would be primarily through conversations or reading. Right now, even conversations have come down because most people in the younger generation are more comfortable texting than actually speaking. And of course, so really consume as much third-party content as possible, because then you get to go beyond your own experiences and broaden the scope of your learning.
Just the last question then, Azfar. How would you best describe yourself in one adjective?
Trustworthy.
Fantastic. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Lovely conversation with Mr. Azfar Hussain. Thank you, Azfar, again for your time and constantly, as I said, over the years for being supportive to this study.
Most welcome, Rahul. As usual, I've enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much for the opportunity.